Hello, Adriana and Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Okay, we can start our session, right? First of all, I would like you guys can start with introducing yourself, I guess. Then we can start our session, right? So yeah, Adriana, you're muted. Okay.
Sorry. Our intros are part of the presentation, so we have that covered.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Then I think we can start our session.
Cool.
Okay. Let me add this presentation. Okay. Great.
Perfect. All right. Hey everyone, welcome to Onboarding Doesn't Have to Suck. We're super excited to be presenting to you today. Before we get started, allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Adriana Vilela, and I am I've been doing computer things for about 20 years, longer if you count me learning BASIC at age 10. So I've been doing this for a while. I'm a CNCF ambassador, second year HashiCorp ambassador, blogger, and podcaster. I have a podcast that I do with my daughter called Geeking Out. By day, I am a senior staff developer advocate in the observability space, spending a chunk of my time as a maintainer of the OTel end user SIG. And by night, I climb walls at my local climbing gym, and I also love capybaras.
And hey, y'all. My name's Ana Margarita Medina. I have the pleasure of working alongside Adriana, also as a senior staff developer advocate, as well as a second-time CNCF ambassador. I'm part of the GC for CNCF's Captain Project, contribute to the Kubernetes release team, also a member of the Open Telemetry End User SIG, and I sit on the Code of Conduct Committee for Kubernetes. I've been in tech for almost 15 years, and I've been focusing on cloud infrastructure and reliability for the last 7 years. When I'm not doing computer things, you can find me cooking Latin food, watercoloring, or messing around with makeup looks. So let's get this talk started. But prior to getting the talk started, we have a little fun skit prepared for you. So hopefully that will get a way to get started the talk and set up the scene for today. Hello, Adriana. What's happening? Welcome to your new job.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. Happy to be here.
You should have received your new laptop by now. After I explain HR policies and procedures, you will go ahead and join Bob, Milton, and Peter in a Zoom call for tech onboarding over the next 2 days. There, you and your classmates will sit and install the company's blessed tools on your devices. It's mandatory attendance. If you can be there by 9 a.m., that would be great.
Wait, we're going to be installing things manually?
Yeah, of course. We have always done it this way. Do you have a problem with it?
Well, that'll take days, and I kind of have this really nice automation set up with Ansible to install all my tools.
Yeah, that's nice. But you can't do that here. Go ahead and keep that for your personal laptop. We have our allowed set of tools, and you can't deviate from that because we need to stick with corporate compliance rules. If this scenario is familiar to you at all, you're not alone. The fact of the matter is that onboarding can be challenging and stressful. After all, you're in a new job with new people, new policies, and new procedures. You also have to deal with the new tech stack and tooling. This often comes with a high learning curve as you're trying to navigate a new environment. But you couple that with the fact that many organizations don't have their act together and don't have a streamlined onboarding experience. This results in a very, very time-consuming process. One of the challenges that we have when setting up new developer machine is software installation. Many organizations just provide new employees with machines that have a base image. This contains a common set of software of tools that is used by everyone in the company, regardless of the role that they're in. This software includes and is not limited to this list, starting out with something like a browser, something like Chrome, an email client, something like Outlook, some productivity tools like Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Of course, we can't forget our collaboration software like Slack or Teams, or the video conferencing software like Zoom. And lastly, we have our security software like a VPN. This means that developers must then take some time to install development tools on their own. And then, depending on the type of organization that they work at, that installation experience can be very different. It can be one of the following.
The Vault. So here, developers are allowed to install software only if it's from an approved list. And this is usually managed by a security team, and approvals for software might take a really, really long time. Now, this type of thing is common in organizations that maintain high levels of security and compliance because they're dealing with extremely sensitive data. So you might see this at a financial institution or a healthcare institution.
Then we have the red tape tango, where developers are allowed to install software from an approved list, but they can go through this whitelisting process to add more software to that approved list. This might not be the vault, but due to the processes and policies, approvals for software might actually take a while. And this is common in organizations that maintain high security, compliance standards, but they do have some wiggle room. This includes things like SaaS companies or consulting companies.
And then finally, we wrap things up with the Wild Wild West. And this is where we can have a free-for-all. Basically, developers can install whatever they want on their machines. Usually that means that the organization lacks processes or guides on how to get started. And we see this type of thing in small fledgling organizations where security isn't a concern, at least not yet. So for example, in small startups. So all that said, what exactly goes into a developer environment? Now, the list that we're going to show you is by no means exhaustive, but it should give you a pretty good idea of the type of tooling that developers want and need. So, of course, we start with our language-specific software development kits or SDKs, such as the ones that we might use for Python, Go, and Java. After all, you need to compile or interpret your code. You need to be able to package it up, etc. Now, of course, we can't forget our integrated development environments or IDEs so that you can write your code along with the applicable plugins that you love and rely on. And of course, as a developer, you have to be able to actually install these plugins on your favorite IDE. Now, as developers, we also love our command line. So having a terminal and a default shell is important, along with the ability for developers to install and configure their favorite shell. And who can forget Git for source control management, along with various command line interfaces or CLIs, depending on what your team does. Now, this may include things such as kubectl or perhaps the CLI for the cloud provider used at your organization, whether it's AWS, G-Cloud, or Azure. We also need some virtual environment tools such as Docker and VirtualBox, and supporting tools required by your team such as Postman and Homebrew. Now, with all the stuff that you have to install on your machine, wouldn't it be nice to have a one-click install of all of this stuff from day one? And this is where platform engineering can help. But first, let's define a few terms. Now, we realize that there are many, many different interpretations and definitions of platform engineering, and our favorite one defines platform engineering as the next step in the evolution of DevOps. So let's start at the beginning with our baseline definition. So DevOps gives us the fundamental principles of collaboration, codifying all the things, automating all the things, and rapid feedback loops. Then site reliability engineering, or SRE, applies those DevOps principles with the focus on customer impact and reliability. And so going to platform engineering, we see that as an extension of SRE. Now, while SRE is focused on external customers, platform engineering takes things a step further and also focuses on internal customers, i.e. the developer. And developer experience, or DevX, is but one aspect of platform engineering, and that happens to be what we'll be exploring today. But what is DevX? DevX is about how developers feel, think, and value what they do. But why does it matter?
Well, it's not just according to us that DevX really matters. According to DevX in Action, a study of its tangible impacts, a study by Dr. Nicole Forsgren and others, published on ACMQ, Developers who find their tools and work processes intuitive and easy to use feel that they're 50% more innovative compared to those with opaque or hard to understand processes. Unintuitive tools and processes can be both a time sink and a source of frustration. In either case, a severe hindrance to individuals and teams' creativity. This means that DevX matters and it impacts developer productivity and satisfaction. Furthermore, the report highlights that there's a difference between simply writing code and writing code in an environment that is optimized for writing code. Environments that are optimized for writing code are efficient, effective, and conducive to well-being, and they rely on the right mix of tools and practices and processes and social structures. If you want to take a look at the study, you can scan the QR code that's shown here, or we have it all the way at the end as well. So, what should we keep in mind when building out an onboarding experience for your developers? Well, you want to make sure to ask yourself these questions. Whether it's in the security or flexibility, or that you need to care about dependency management or time to value, but you're just asking these questions to understand the type of onboarding experience that you want to bring to your developers. The thing is, the platform engineering is great because you actually don't have to choose one column over the other. So, you might be wondering, how is it that I can get this done? Well, before we answer that question, we have to look at two more terms that we need to define. Let's take a look at two developer type of environment setups. On one hand, we can use self-contained environments. This is where the developer machine has just the base tooling only, nothing else installed, and developer tools are accessed via a containerized or virtualized environment. This runs either locally or on the cloud, or a combination of both, something like a cloud-hosted developer container and a local IDE. Examples of this include things like GitHub Codespaces or Vagrant.
On the other hand, you can install all of your tools locally. So this is where your developer tools are installed and accessed on a local machine. Now, this means that it requires more local compute and storage compared to running a self-contained dev environment in the cloud, where your workstation is basically just a terminal in that case. Here is where a configuration management tool such as Ansible can be used to configure and install developer tools locally. Now, you might be wondering, okay, what tools do we use to accomplish this? So here's a list of the tools that can help us with these kinds of setups, and they're listed in alphabetical order. So we have Ansible, Backstage, DevPod, GitHub Codespaces, Cradix, Port, and Vagrant. Now, this chart here gives you a basic overview of the capabilities of each tool. And while some of the tools do the same things, other tools can actually complement each other to help improve developer onboarding experience. So let's take a look at what two potential platform engineering onboarding flows might look like.
The first example shows the onboarding flow for a self-contained developer environment. In this case, is going to be leveraging GitHub Codespaces. With GitHub Codespaces, the platform engineering is responsible for creating the Codespaces configurations, and environments can be easily spun up as well as brought down. Since the whole environment is remote, you don't need to worry about having the right amount of processing power or storage space and developer tooling running on your machine. The trade-off here is that you probably need to manage different Codespaces for different repos or even different branches. The flow works as follows. The developer arrives on onboarding day very excited about their workday. The developer then kicks off the onboarding process by going to a designated wiki, which takes them to a GitHub repo. From there, they're able to bootstrap a virtual environment running on the cloud hosted by GitHub. This environment contains all of the tools and configurations needed to start adding value to the team. Once this environment is created, they're able to work on their first PR. This is hopefully done on the first day of work.
Our second example is an example of a local install onboarding workflow. So remember, as I mentioned earlier, that unlike in the self-contained onboarding workflow, the developer does all of the work on their own developer machine. So making sure that you have that good amount of storage and compute power is essential. But it also means that you have to have all of the tools that you need at your disposal in the same place. So you don't need to rely on a network connection to be able to access those tools. Now, here we're making use of a developer portal. Now, examples of developer portal tools include Backstage, which is actually an open source CNCF tool with an optional paid SaaS offering, and Port, which is a paid SaaS offering. Developer portal tool would access GitHub Actions to orchestrate the onboarding, or it can be any other type of orchestration tool that tickles your fancy, like Jenkins, for example. And then Ansible to install and configure tooling onto the developer workstation. Again, pick your favorite configuration management other than Ansible. Could be Puppet or Chef, for example. So in this flow, the developer will kick off the onboarding process from a developer portal. The developer portal tool then triggers a GitHub action. The GitHub action in turn kicks off an Ansible playbook. And this Ansible playbook is responsible for installing and configuring on the developer machine in much the same way that you would do on a production server. So in this case, the production server is your developer machine. The playbook also sets up the appropriate permissions and access to various systems and services that the developer will need to access during their time on that team. Now, at this point, the developer also has the option to kick off workflows to install additional corporate sanctioned developer tools via the same developer portal. So basically, it follows the exact same steps that we covered earlier for the base install. So there you have it. Now, before we wrap up, we wanted to leave you with some tips for building a better onboarding experience for developers. First off, you need to balance the ease of installation of software with security and compliance constraints. Is your organization a Vault, Red Tape Tango, or Wild Wild West type of org? And do you want to provide your developers with a self-contained or local dev environment setup?
The next tip is that we need to remember that DevX is never done. There's always going to be room for improvement. So make sure to check in with your newly hired developers to get feedback on their recent onboarding experience while it's still fresh on their mind. But similarly, check in with all developers a couple of times per year to get their thoughts on developer experience in their teams. And finally, keep that feedback running by running a developer experience surveys 1 or 2 times a year. And you have to remember that you don't want to work in isolation. DevX is a team sport. You first need feedback from InfoSec to make sure that you are addressing those security requirements that they have, but you also need to work with developers to understand what types of tools they need and why they need them. You also want to make sure to talk to other platform engineers outside of your organization to see if you can pick up any interesting tips, tricks, or best practices.
And finally, don't forget the humans. We are huge fans of the buddy system for onboarding. So the buddy system is the system whereby you pair one seasoned employee with a new hire to be the go-to source when they come on board. You want to also ensure that you create and foster relationships between your new hires and leadership, along with some teammates in other key departments like sales, marketing, and product. And chances are when you're onboarding for a new organization, you're not all onboarding in the same area. So you're not necessarily onboarding with all tech folks. You're probably onboarding with some sales folks, from some marketing folks. So this is a great opportunity to make friends with those folks, to really get some insights into how other parts of the organizations work. And finally, have a place, whether it's a Slack channel or a group in Teams, where new hires can talk to one another, meet each other, and ask questions. So before we sign off, we wanted to leave you with some useful resources and some shameless self-promotions. First of all, if you like reading, we have a blog post version of this talk. And as Anna mentioned earlier, we do have a link to that study that she was talking about on developer experience. We have a couple of cool technical links as well. So first of all, if you want to see what it's like to use an Ansible playbook to install stuff on a local machine, I actually have an Ansible playbook for installing developer tooling on my personal machine every time I get a new laptop. And it's come really handy, and I've open sourced the work. It actually came in handy after I got my my latest personal MacBook, where I promptly, a month after getting it, spilled like a half liter of water on the keyboard and basically fried the machine. So after it came back from repair, I used my Ansible playbook to reinstall everything. Also, there's a really cool repo called HashiCube, and it's basically, it spins up an entire self-contained environment provisioned using Vagrant, and it runs on Docker. And basically, it installs all of the HashiStack tools, including HashiCorp Nomad, Console, Vault, all in a Docker container, so that you can use this as a single integrated self-contained development environment for playing around with the Hashi tools. And this is, again, an open source project. It's very cool. As I mentioned, I have a podcast that I run with my daughter called Geeking Out, and I've had some awesome guests on, such as Kelsey Hightower, Hazel Weekly, and Charity Majors. And Anna has also been a guest on my podcast. And Anna and I used to have a podcast together. It ran for 2 lovely seasons, and it was awesome, and we miss it dearly. And we also had some really awesome guests on our podcast, including Alex Hidalgo and Liz Fong Jones. So definitely check it out.
And in case you're wondering, all the images in this deck were generated by AI, because while we can't draw, we are great prompt engineers. So thank you to our evil AI overload, Bing AI, powered by DALL-E 3, for these images.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, everyone, for attending our talk. Signing off with peace, love, and code.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for your substation. I think we can take 1 or 2 questions if you have. Okay, so let's put in the comment section for the questions. Okay, folks, you can ask your questions out here. And after that, obviously, we'll have a quiz, small quiz, right? Okay, let's see. I think we have a question, and the question is, what are the common challenges in developer onboarding that platform engineering aims to address? Let me just hide it out. I hope so. Yeah.
I can start with it. I think
Sure.
one of the main ones is that you want to ensure that your entire company has similar tooling. And that means like standardization, and you want to do that for many reasons. You want to do that for the fact of collaboration, like everyone having access to the same language and being able to collaborate more easily. But you want to do that from a security standpoint as well. You get a chance to standardize the versions of software that folks are in, so you can keep an easier, like a closer look at vulnerabilities that are going on with every single version. And all of this really just allows for like that ability for engineers to really start providing value to the team. You're also codifying it so you have ways to keep things up to date, but also really give it to engineers and have them get started as soon as possible, and things kind of get started, similar to how like Adriana talks about her Ansible playbook. You can get a new laptop, run that on your first day, and within a few hours you'll be able to get access to all of your tooling after logging in and really start contributing.
Yeah, it's really about getting that consistency across the board, so that you're not like, oh my God, what was that configuration that I used again?
Okay. Another question from him, and that is, how can platform engineering streamline the onboarding process for new developers?
I think just by having it codified, because you've defined it as code, like you are basically saying this is how we do it, right? You're kind of saving developers from themselves by putting guardrails on the onboarding process. By basically you're adopting those principles of DevOps.
And this results into things being done a lot quicker. So it can be seen as like setting up a DigitalOcean, AWS, Kubernetes cluster. By this being codified, everything is kind of being done, and this is going to be like installing like the basis of it, things that need to go on top of it. And this means that it's going to take a lot less time than someone having to go through manual steps, copying from a tutorial, copying from a wiki page. And it also leaves for less room for error. So you're spending a lot less time on debugging and having to go back and forth between another team of like, I installed this, what's my next step? And of course, this also means that you're not sitting in a classroom like we explained in that video where you're like spending 2 days installing 10 pieces of software. So you're really making it about like, we want to get you up to speed to do the things that you're here to do.